The day everything shattered began with the muted hum of normalcy, soft and comfortable. I was Mark, a man defined by routines, by stability. The early morning sun cast golden streaks across the kitchen counter as I sipped my coffee, skimming through emails on my tablet. Lucy, my wife of nearly a decade, was already out for her morning run. A picture of fitness, all long blonde hair and a Scandinavian glow that made her the envy of our friends. We both worked at the same marketing firm, an arrangement that some couples might find suffocating, but one we had mastered over the years. I led the IT department, while Lucy dazzled as a client ambassador, her title both vague and vaguely glamorous. Everything in our lives was structured, synchronized. 2 kids, Emma and Daniel, mornings filled with the clatter of breakfast and the chaotic shuffle of backpacks and shoes. Weekends spent between soccer games and family barbecues. This weekend, however, was different. A rare opportunity, according to our firm's CEO, Jack Edwards, who called it the trip of a lifetime. A long weekend on a private island owned by William Fellows, our most valuable client, whose company had the power to shift our quarterly figures single-handedly. William was a man whose name was whispered with reverence, his fortune as vast as it was discreet. I'd never met him, but Lucy had mentioned him in passing. Always with that professional distance, until lately. William has such high standards, she'd said one night, glass of white wine in hand, a smile playing on her lips. Everything with him is about quality. I'd glanced at her, something uneasy stirring in my chest. But she caught my gaze and laughed. "You're not jealous of a client, are you?" I wasn't. Not then. The morning of our departure was electric with anticipation. Emma and Daniel waved at us from the driveway, their grandparents wrangling them into promises of junk food and late bedtimes. I kissed them both, the familiar scent of their sun-warmed hair grounding me. The private charter plane was a sleek embodiment of luxury. White leather seats and polished accents, the hum of engines beneath us like a cat's purr. Lucy was radiant, chatting easily with Jack and the other directors. As we flew over a sea that unfurled like liquid sapphire, she pressed my hand and whispered, "Isn't this amazing?" Her blue eyes glistened with excitement, and I nodded, the feeling of unease forgotten for the moment. The island appeared on the horizon like a mirage, crescent beaches of blinding white sand cradled by emerald palms, the estate itself set back with a grandeur that suggested old money. William met us at the dock, tanned and fit, with silver-flecked hair that glinted in the sunlight. He was courteous, his handshake firm as he welcomed us. The way Lucy's smile widened at his greeting caught my attention, but I brushed it off. It was the warmth of a host meeting a familiar face, nothing more. The afternoon melted away with ease. Drinks by the pool, laughter bubbling as people eased out of their corporate shells. I found myself talking with one of the directors, a fellow father who shared stories of his teenage daughter's rebellious antics. But I kept an eye on Lucy. She moved through the gathering with a practiced grace, chatting here, a laugh there. And William's eyes found her more often than not. Dinner that evening was held on the veranda, the ocean's lullaby harmonizing with the clink of glasses and silverware. Candles flickered, casting shadows that danced across William's chiseled features as he addressed us. To new beginnings and fruitful partnerships, he toasted, his gaze lingering on Lucy. The flicker of unease returned, sharper this time. After dinner, I excused myself to wander along the beach, the tide licking at my feet as stars winked down. The air was cool, tinged with the scent of salt and the faintest trace of flowers. I heard footsteps behind me and turned to see Lucy approaching, a silhouette outlined against the glow of the estate. She stood beside me, quiet, and for a moment we watched the moon paint a silver path across the sea. "Isn't this place something?" she said softly. "It is," I replied. My voice held a question, unspoken, but palpable. Lucy glanced at me, her smile faltering. "What's wrong, Mark?" "Nothing," I lied. The truth was heavy on my tongue, the suspicion curling in my gut, coiled and ready. But I swallowed it down, telling myself it was nothing. Just nerves, just the unfamiliar setting, just William's attention to my wife that simmered in the background like a low flame. The next day was a blur of activity, snorkeling in clear waters where fish shimmered like confetti, lazy hours in the sun, laughter rising like the tide. Lucy was in her element, radiant and carefree. I wanted to reach out, to pull her close and remind myself that this was my life, my marriage. But there was always a conversation, a moment that slipped between us. As the evening deepened, William approached with an invitation. "Join me in my office, Mark," he said, voice smooth and commanding. Lucy was at my side, eyes darting between us. "It's about a new project I'd like your input on," he continued, leading us to a room adorned with dark wood and old books that whispered of generations of power. He gestured for us to sit, then fixed Lucy with a look that made my skin prickle. "I've enjoyed working with you these past months," he said, a hint of something more in his tone. My heart began to thrum, its steady beat broken by uncertainty. And then, as if he were discussing the weather, William laid out his offer. The air seemed to thicken, Lucy's silence pressing into the room. My mind spun, grasping for the sense behind what I was hearing, but found only shards of disbelief. Lucy's eyes found mine, wide with something that looked like guilt. She spoke, voice barely above a whisper. "Mark, I think we should consider it." Time stopped. My world narrowed to the soft sound of waves beyond the window and the deepening realization that my life was about to split open. The room fell silent, the heavy weight of expectation pressing down like a vice. William's proposition hung in the air, absurd and impossible, yet as tangible as the polished wood of his office desk. I felt like I was underwater, every sound muffled except for the pounding of my heartbeat. Lucy's eyes, filled with a mixture of apology and defiance, met mine. She was waiting for me to speak, as if I might somehow make sense of the surreal situation. "Consider it?" I repeated, my voice flat, betraying none of the turmoil roiling inside me. The statement was hollow, spoken only to buy time, to process. "Yes," she whispered, barely audible, as if speaking louder might make it more real. Her fingers trembled as she brushed back a strand of her blonde hair. "Mark, it's not what you think." William's expression shifted, the smile still in place but hardened at the edges, as though he were accustomed to being humored, to having his whims indulged. He leaned back in his chair, hands folded neatly, waiting. The casual poise of a man who knew he held the upper hand. "What exactly is this?" I asked, turning my gaze to him, feeling a sudden, reckless urge to shatter the calm veneer of the room. "Some kind of game?" "No game," William replied, his voice smooth, patient. He gestured to Lucy. "I'm simply proposing an opportunity, one that could benefit all of us." I laughed, short and humorless. The sound felt foreign in the charged silence. Lucy flinched at the sound, and I saw a crack in her carefully held composure. Anger surged, sharp and hot, not just at William for suggesting such a thing but at Lucy for standing there, not shouting him down. "We should go," I said abruptly, my tone leaving no room for discussion. I stood, the legs of the chair scraping against the floor like a match struck to dry tinder. Lucy didn't move at first, torn between me and the man across the room. William's smile wavered for a fraction of a second before he recovered, a slight inclination of his head giving the impression of magnanimous concession. "Think about it, Mark," he said as we reached the door. "This is a choice, not an ultimatum." I didn't respond, didn't look back as I led Lucy out of that suffocating room and into the cool night air. The sounds of the ocean whispered beyond the manicured gardens, a reminder of the paradise that had suddenly turned hostile. We walked in silence until the estate was behind us, and the rhythmic crash of waves became the only sound between us. I stopped, turning to face her. The moon painted her features in silver, highlighting the tension etched across her brow. "Explain," I said, the single word tight, controlled. Lucy's mouth opened and closed as she searched for the right words. "Mark, it's complicated." "Then simplify it," I snapped. The anger I'd been trying to keep in check flared, the leash slipping. She crossed her arms, more for comfort than defiance, and looked out at the water as if it might offer her an answer. "It's not about you," she finally said. "It's about options. Control." William represents something, an opportunity one wasn't ready for, but one I felt drawn to explore. When he made that suggestion, it wasn't out of nowhere. An opportunity, I echoed, disbelief dripping from my voice. Lucy, that's not an opportunity, that's utter betrayal. You're considering turning our marriage into some twisted negotiation. It's not like that, she said, the tremor in her voice betraying her. I didn't know he'd do that tonight. But I'd be lying if I said I hadn't thought about it, even just in passing. She hesitated, then met my eyes with a defiance that felt new and jagged. Mark, this life we have, it's predictable, it's comfortable. But sometimes, I feel like I'm suffocating in it. I recoiled as if struck. The words cut deep, deeper than William's absurd proposition, because they were rooted in a truth I hadn't seen coming. The Lucy I knew had always been bright, radiant in her comfort with our shared world. This glimpse into her dissatisfaction, into a yearning I hadn't known existed, left me staggering. I didn't know, I admitted, the anger ebbing, leaving behind something colder, heavier. Because I didn't want you to, she replied. Her voice was steady now, steadier than mine. I tried to keep it to myself, to handle it without shaking the foundation we built. But it's not enough anymore. I don't know what I need, but I know it's more than this. The weight of her confession settled over me. It wasn't William, not really. It was what he represented, a catalyst for something she couldn't even name. The anger returned, but now it was mixed with a helplessness that felt worse. So what now? I asked, my voice rough, ragged at the edges. Do you take him up on his offer? Do I pretend this never happened? Lucy took a step closer, reaching for my hand. Her touch was familiar, warm, yet it felt distant. I don't know, Mark. But I don't want to throw this away. Not without trying to find out if there's a way forward for both of us. I pulled my hand back, the loss of contact immediate and sharp. I can't do this, Lucy. Not tonight. She nodded, tears welling but unshed. We stood there, two shadows under a sky full of indifferent stars, the ocean's rhythm the only thing steady between us. When I turned and walked back toward the estate, leaving her standing alone, I knew that whatever came next would change us forever. The comfort of before was gone, stripped away by the quiet realization that the person I trusted most had desires I didn't understand and couldn't ignore. The morning sun painted the island in hues of orange and gold, a stark contrast to the storm roiling within me. Sleep had been elusive, broken by fits of replaying the events of the night before. William's calm voice, Lucy's hesitant defense, each word carved into my memory like the grooves of a record that wouldn't stop spinning. Breakfast was served in the main dining area, an opulent space that opened to a panoramic view of the ocean. The spread was lavish, fresh fruit, pastries, platters of cured meats and cheeses. But the thought of eating made my stomach twist. I sat alone at one of the smaller tables near the edge of the veranda, watching the waves crash and recede, as if trying to wash away the events of last night. Mark? Jack Edwards' voice interrupted my reverie. He was a large man with a booming laugh and a reputation for keeping the office morale high, but today his expression was pensive. Mind if I join you? He asked, already pulling out a chair. I gestured to the seat across from me. Sure, Jack. He settled in, leaning forward on his elbows. You seem a bit off today. Everything all right? The question, innocent as it was, threatened to split me open. I forced a smile that felt brittle. Didn't sleep well, that's all. The island air, I guess. He nodded, eyes searching mine as if he sensed the lie, but chose not to press it. Yeah, new places can do that. I hope you manage to shake it off before we start the day's activities. William's hosting a tour of the estate grounds later. You and Lucy coming? The mention of Lucy's name made my jaw clench. I hadn't seen her yet this morning, and I wasn't sure I wanted to. We'll see, I said, taking a sip of my coffee to avoid further conversation. Jack's brow furrowed, but before he could say anything else, the man himself, William Fellows, appeared in the dining area, dressed casually yet impeccably in a crisp white shirt and linen trousers. His presence pulled the attention of the room as he moved through it with practiced ease, exchanging polite nods and murmured greetings. Our eyes met for a fraction of a second. His smile barely faltered as he lifted a hand in a subtle gesture of acknowledgement. My fingers itched, the urge to turn my coffee cup into a projectile bubbling up and then dissipating under the weight of common sense. "Good morning, everyone," William said, his voice carrying just enough to reach each table. "I hope you're all enjoying your stay. For those interested, the estate tour starts in an hour." Murmurs of interest swept the room. I glanced at the doors, half expecting Lucy to walk through, flushed and bright-eyed as if nothing had happened. Instead, I saw Charlotte, William's guest from the night before, her eyes landing on me with a curious tilt. She was all elegance, but there was something in the way she looked at me, an almost knowing smirk, that made my skin crawl. I stood abruptly. "Thanks, Jack. I need some air." I left the table and the dining area behind, striding down a path lined with hibiscus and frangipani, their sweet scent cloying in the morning heat. The estate sprawled like a dreamscape, all manicured paths and stone sculptures nestled under a canopy of palm trees. I reached a secluded clearing where the sea breeze cut through the humidity, lifting the tension that had coiled in my chest since the night before. A rustle behind me made me turn. Lucy stood at the edge of the path, her hair loose and catching the light like spun gold. She didn't say anything at first, just watched me with those blue eyes that had held so many secrets. "I wasn't sure if you'd want to see me," she finally said, stepping into the clearing. I scoffed, the sound bitter even to my ears. "You were right to wonder." She sighed, a sound that seemed to carry years of weariness. "Mark, we need to talk." "I think we did plenty of that last night," I snapped. The anger that had simmered all morning surged up, a tide I couldn't hold back. "Or do you want to clarify why you hesitated when he made that offer? Why you even entertained it for a second?" Tears shimmered in her eyes, but she blinked them back. Lucy was never one for dramatic displays. "I wasn't going to do it, Mark. It's not that simple." "Then explain it to me," I said, crossing my arms to keep my hands from shaking. "Make me understand how the woman I've built a life with was tempted to throw it all away for what, exactly? Adventure? Excitement?" "It's not just that," she said, taking a tentative step forward. "It's about feeling alive, about reclaiming something I lost somewhere along the way. Before the house, before the kids, before we became these people living parallel lives. Don't you feel it, too? The sameness, the suffocating predictability?" Her words struck a chord I hadn't expected, a truth I didn't want to admit. But it was wrapped in betrayal, poisoned by William's arrogant offer. I shook my head. "You should have talked to me, Lucy. We should have faced this together. Not brought a stranger into our marriage." "I know," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I know." And when he suggested it, I realized just how far off course I drifted. That's why I didn't say yes, Mark. I didn't say yes because I knew I couldn't do that to you. The admission hung between us, raw and exposed. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the woman I fell in love with, now layered with fears and regrets I hadn't understood until now. "So where does that leave us?" I asked, softer this time, the edge of anger dulled by exhaustion. "It leaves us with a choice," she said. "To face this, to talk, to fix what's broken. Or to walk away before we break each other even more." Silence followed, the weight of the choice pressing down like a lead blanket. The sound of the sea, ever constant, reminded me that the world was still turning, even if ours felt as though it had stopped. "I need time," I said, finally. "To think. To figure out if I can come back from this." She nodded, a tear slipping free and tracing a path down her cheek. "Take all the time you need." I watched her walk back up the path, her figure retreating until it was swallowed by the lush greenery. Alone, I sat down on a sun-warmed stone and closed my eyes, letting the wind and the distant crash of waves wash over me. The choice was mine, but I knew it would shape the rest of my life. The days that followed on the island passed like a fever dream. I kept my distance from everyone, avoiding conversations, dodging William's pointed glances, and declining Jack's jovial attempts at camaraderie. Lucy stayed in the background, respectful of the space I needed, yet her presence was like a weight pressing on my chest whenever I caught a glimpse of her across the estate grounds. The final night was marked by a grand dinner, a send-off orchestrated by William to end our stay with a flourish. The dining hall was transformed with glowing lanterns and soft music, a stage set for celebration, but the air felt electric, charged with unsaid words and lingering tensions. I hesitated at the doorway, torn between turning back to the solitude of our room and joining the others to keep up appearances. "Mark," a voice called softly behind me. Lucy stood there, the silvery dress she wore catching the dim light, making her look ethereal, distant. "Will you sit with me tonight?" I stared at her, the battle between hurt and longing waging inside me. Finally, I nodded, too tired to fight anymore. We found a table near the window, the view of the ocean obscured by the reflection of our pale, strained faces. The evening proceeded with toasts and laughter that felt out of sync with the quiet storm in my mind. William took the stage at one point, raising a glass, his eyes flitting to Lucy, then to me, as he spoke of prosperity and partnership. The room erupted in applause, but it was as hollow as the man's charm. Lucy reached for my hand under the table, her touch tentative, trembling. I didn't pull away, but I couldn't find the will to squeeze back. When the music started, couples drifted to the dance floor. I stayed seated, watching the others sway in time to the soft rhythm, wondering how something so simple could now seem so alien. "Dance with me?" Lucy asked, breaking the silence between us. Her eyes, a mix of hope and fear, searched my face. "I can't," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. She nodded, the shadow of acceptance darkening her expression. "I understand." An hour passed, then another. The party thinned out, the celebratory mood waning as people retreated to their rooms. I stood to leave, but Lucy caught my arm. "Please, Mark. Let's talk. One last time." I sighed, the weight of exhaustion pressing down on me, yet I followed her out into the gardens. The night air was cool, the sky clear and scattered with stars. We walked in silence until we reached the gazebo at the far end of the estate, a place secluded enough that it felt like our own hidden world. "Do you remember when we came here?" she asked, wrapping her arms around herself as if warding off the chill. "Before everything got complicated?" "Of course I do," I said, the memory stabbing through me with bittersweet clarity. The first days of the trip when the island seemed like paradise, before the ugly truth had surfaced. "I wish we could go back," she whispered, tears tracing silver paths down her cheeks. "I wish I could undo the things that made you doubt me, made you question this life we built." "It's not that simple, Lucy," I said, the sorrow in my voice surprising even me. "Some things once broken, they can't be fixed." She took a step closer, the distance between us closing but still vast. "I love you, Mark." I never stopped, even when I felt lost. I opened my mouth to respond, but the words caught in my throat, strangled by a sudden, visceral realization: I did love her. I loved her fiercely, painfully. But the foundation of that love was cracked, and no matter how hard we tried, it would never hold the same way again. A rustle behind us broke the spell. I turned to see William standing at the edge of the garden, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "Am I interrupting?" His voice was smooth, polished, as always. I felt Lucy stiffen beside me. "What are you doing here?" I asked, anger flaring as quickly as it dissipated into resignation. "I thought I'd come for some air," he said, stepping forward. The way he looked at Lucy made something snap inside me, a coil wound too tightly finally giving way. Before I could react, Lucy stepped between us, her voice sharp and trembling. "William, please. Just go." He smirked, the arrogance that had always simmered beneath his civility bubbling to the surface. "Why? Afraid he'll learn something else you didn't tell him?" The air turned electric, charged with words unspoken and threats unvoiced. I pushed past Lucy, grabbing William by the collar, the movement more instinct than intention. His smile faltered as I pulled him close, my voice low and deadly. "You don't know what you've done," I whispered. "Mark, stop!" Lucy cried, pulling at my arm, her touch shaking. But before I could process the next moment, before the anger could dissipate or reason return, William wrenched back and slipped. The soft sound of surprise that escaped him was cut off as his head struck the stone edge of the gazebo with a sickening thud. Time seemed to stop, the silence that followed thicker than the ocean air. Lucy fell to her knees beside him, fingers pressed to his neck. She looked up at me, her face pale as moonlight, eyes wide with terror. "He's not breathing," she said, voice cracking on the last word. The world splintered, every choice and consequence I had ever known spiraling into this one impossible moment. The shouts came moments later, feet pounding toward us, voices raised in confusion and alarm. But all I could see was Lucy, her tears mingling with the blood pooling around William's still form. And in that instant, I knew there was no going back. The life we had, the love that once held us, it was gone, buried beneath regret and a moment's irreversible rage.